After graduating from London Business School, I joined Morgan Stanley. And then when I was working at Morgan Stanley in London in the tech investment banking team, after less than a year, I joined HG Capital, one of Europe's leading tech private equity. My name is Stefan. I'm also the co-founder of Break Into PE, where we help dozens of candidates break into private equity in Europe. We've helped candidates land roles at firms like Blackstone, Carlyle, EQT, and many others. And in this video, I show exactly how I managed to break into the buy side. So the first point is focus. Many people are interested in private equity because they think they will be rich quickly. It's very interesting. Everybody speaks when you're in finance or strategy consulting about the so-called buy side. But understand what is actually private equity. And within private equity, what do you find interesting? So for me, it was very clear that I wanted to go into the technology space. So early on, I already identified from day one basically that I will only focus on tech private equity and tech investing firms. When headhunters reached out to me, as they always do when you're working at one of the top investment banks in London, you will get invited to different processes. Distressed investing, industrials, etc., etc. You need to be focused early on because otherwise you will start doing processes that are not helpful in what you want to achieve and you will only be distracted. So for me, I knew I want to only focus on tech processes. I interviewed with 4 funds, all in the technology private equity space, and they were like the leading players. I identified who the headhunters are that are covering these firms. And I was then very strategic in meeting those headhunters then also in person. So that brings me to the second point. So first point is make sure that you understand what your focus is and say no to everything else that is not in focus. If it's consumer retail, just focus on consumer retail funds, identify what the top funds are. Number 2, identify how you get in touch with them. And number 3, prepare specifically for them. So let's say you have done this. Let's say you're also interested in tech private equity. What's next? Number 2 for me, it was building relationships early on. As opposed to just waiting for the headhunters to call me and invite me to a process, I was proactive. I got in touch with the headhunters myself and I told them very clearly what I'm looking for. And this was a big difference also compared to other candidates where they usually get responses like, oh, I'm interested in private equity and I'm currently in XYZ team. I came and said, look, I want to go into a leading tech private equity firm. These are the funds I'm interested in. Are you covering those? Can you help me? Besides that, it's not only about getting in touch, but it's also building the relationship with the headhunters because that's different to investment banking strategy consulting. Here, recruiting typically works via the headhunters. They are the gatekeepers. So what helped me was to meet the headhunters in person because in the end, they are incentivized to help you break into PE. You need to understand that's how they make money. They get a commission, typically 30% of the total first year comp. So let's say in private equity, your first year, you make 200K. So they would get 30% of that. So they would get 60K as a commission for placing you. So they want to put you in private equity. They're very happy. And if they know that you're specific, this is something that's very beneficial. I was meeting them for coffee, trying to get to know them as well and get as much knowledge as I can about how I can break into these funds. Number 3 is momentum. Since for me, I was very early on in the process. Most people told me, look, Stefan, you cannot break into like a leading private equity firm after only 6 months. Forget it. You need 2-3 years of full-time work experience. I didn't listen to them. I said, how can I actually make it happen? So after only 6 months, I was interviewing with the top private equity firms in Europe. I chose the 4 that I was most interested in, who the headhunters are, got in touch with those, and eventually when the processes started off, I was interviewing with those. Not only that I started with those 4, for all 4, I got into the final round. And I'm not saying here to be confident or arrogant, as want to show you how good I am. It's quite the opposite because I think most of you out there are much smarter than myself. And even back then when I was at Morgan Stanley, a lot of my colleagues were much smarter than myself. But the point was I had a clear focus and process. And so here again, how did I get to the advanced interview stages with all of these funds? It was because I created momentum. So here's the catch. Most people will do it the following way. They'll be interested in private equity because all of their friends are speaking about it when they're in finance. A headhunter reaches out, tells you, okay, you want to get into this process. You say, oh, that sounds interesting. And then you do it. You're probably not as well prepared. You say, oh, I just do it to practice. And then you have your first interview process. It doesn't work really well. Afterwards, the headhunters, they think you're not the right fit. They may not put you forward again. So you get into this, let's say, negative spiral. So the important point in order to avoid the spiral, the opposite actually create a positive flywheel, is momentum. So for me, I timed it such that I was interviewing with those almost simultaneously. Obviously, I was working full time and investment banking is not a 9 to 5. So I had to also manage a lot of these things in parallel, which can be quite challenging. But I was determined to break in. And so for me, the momentum helped because once I was interviewing with one fund and advancing to the next round, I could use that as leverage for the other fund. Say, hey, and also since these are different headhunters, they don't want to lose the fee to another fund. So basically, I created this positive momentum. Say, look, actually, in that case was, for example, Apex or Advent. Look, I'm advancing here at Apex to the next round, but I would really love to work with Advent. You need to keep the ball warm. And the funds were like, oh, he's a candidate that's in demand. And they were not looking like, oh, the guy has only 6 months of full-time working experience or less than a year. They were like, okay, this guy is in demand. So it seems that I'm missing something. And on top of that, I was doing the interview as well. They were like, okay, let me progress him to the next stage. So this was the third point. momentum. Momentum is critical. And not only when it comes to then advancing in the interview process, but also then landing offers. So this is something I've seen also with many candidates. As with Breaking to PE, we have a team of coaches, all ex-private equity from the best funds, that are supporting candidates breaking into the industry. And one thing that I typically see is a lot of times people come also to us, not just at the beginning, maybe they've already tried it by themselves. And some of them even went to the final interview stage, but they don't land the offers. And the problem is, and this is fundamentally different than investment banking strategy consulting. And look, so there's one point that I see that's fundamentally different on the sell side versus the buy side. On the sell side, investment banking consulting, if you check all the boxes, you most likely will land the dream role. Let's say one of the top banks. It's maybe not Goldman Sachs, it may be another one, more of a boutique Deutsche Bank, for example, or like a boutique Centerview, etc. But if you fit the boxes, I would say you get the role. And similar for consulting. Again, it's still supply and demand, it's not guaranteed. But in private equity, I've seen that, let's say, much more extreme. So there are many candidates who are very well prepared, who do the right things, they get to the final round, but then they don't land the roles. And so the point is really, why is that? Because private equity firms, they hire only a handful of people. Sometimes they would hire just one person per year. So they're very selective in who they choose. They think, is that somebody that has partner potential, that can be here over the long term? And that's why you need momentum, because you basically need to force an outcome. Meaning, you say, look, I would love to do it with you, but otherwise I may have to go with them, or they're close to giving me an offer. Where do you stand? So you need to create this sense of urgency. And look, if I put this together, these are really the elements that helped me when I broke into private equity. So it's number one, it's having a clear focus. Number two, building the relationships early on. And number three, it's the momentum. One point that is important to mention that I think is something that's particular also for the German market, or like the continental European market, is that I also did internships before, and also internship in private equity. And I think this is something that also helped me to be already prepared. In the UK, oftentimes candidates come from top universities, Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, etc., and maybe don't even study finance. And the internships they did are great, but very short and targeted towards investment banking. For myself, since I also did a master's straight after undergrad, I did a one-year master's in London Business School, I also took the chance to get experience in private equity prior. And this was something that, at least in my case, was very helpful. So also for you, let's say you're in Germany, you're in Italy, in France, in Spain, where it's quite common to also do a master's degree right after undergrad. It can be also interesting if we say you eventually want to go into private equity, you have some time on your hands, see if you can do a private equity internship. Regardless if it's a big fund or small fund, just being able to say, look, I've been on the private equity side, I've seen it from the inside, can be extremely valuable. That was the case for me. So I was very fortunate how everything came together, but again, it was not just luck, it was preparation. And why do I say that? Because we've helped many candidates also on the Breaking to PE side, exactly with the same framework that we're using, with this like three elements. First of all, identify the right funds and land interviews. Number two, progress in the interviews. And number three, land offers. So breaking into private equity has been a game changer for my career. If you want to land your dream role in private equity, and if you're currently investment banking or strategy consulting and want to learn more, start your free assessment on our website, breakingtobe.com. I'm sure we can help you, and we would love to support you in the journey.